The quiet life suits me. I prefer solitude, the undisturbed hours where my thoughts flow freely, and the only voices I hear are the ones I create on the page. Writing is where I find my peace, where the world makes sense. Social gatherings, on the other hand, have never been my thing. The noise, the forced small talk, the endless pretending to care about conversations that mean nothing to me. It's exhausting. So I avoid them whenever I can. If there was one thing that used to matter to me more than my work, it was my marriage. Used to. Lucy and I have been married for years, but at some point, we stopped being us. We weren't miserable. We didn't fight, not often at least, but we also didn't talk. We existed under the same roof, living separate lives that occasionally brushed against each other but never truly connected. The love we once had got lost somewhere in the silence between us. Lucy was always different from me. Outgoing, ambitious, constantly moving. She thrived in fast-paced environments. Her job as a consultant demanded her time, her energy, her presence. Late nights at the office became her norm. Business trips stretched longer than necessary. At first, I asked questions. Why so late? Can't you finish up earlier? When will we get time together? But the answers were always the same, rehearsed, dismissive. Eventually, I stopped asking. I stopped waiting. I buried myself in my work, in the solace of my words, in the quiet that no longer felt lonely. It was easier that way. Then, one evening, Lucy mentioned a company party. She didn't just invite me, she insisted. Said it would be good for me, a chance to meet some of the best minds in her industry, a networking opportunity. As if I had any interest in schmoozing with corporate types, pretending to care about business strategies and stock markets. But there was something about the way she pushed it. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was a demand. For the first time in a long time, it felt like she was making an effort. And despite everything, there was still a part of me that wanted to believe our marriage wasn't beyond saving. Maybe this was her way of pulling me into her world, the way I had always wanted her to. Maybe this was a step toward fixing things. So, after some resistance, I agreed. I wasn't exactly eager, but if there was even the slightest chance that this could be a step toward us, I was willing to endure a few hours of forced smiles and empty conversations. At the venue, we looked like the perfect couple. Lucy had gone all out, dressed in an elegant, form-fitting gown that turned heads the moment we arrived. I had made an effort too, slipping into a tailored suit, though I cared little for appearances. The party was grand, sophisticated, filled with polished professionals discussing stocks and mergers between sips of expensive wine. Lucy wasted no time introducing me to her colleagues. Their reactions were predictable: polite curiosity, mild surprise. "So you're Theo. We've heard so much about you." I shook hands, nodded, exchanged pleasantries. It was clear that my presence was something of a novelty. The mysterious husband, the writer who never showed up to social events. Some asked about my work, my books, my thoughts on whatever topic they assumed would interest me. Surprisingly, I found myself engaging more than I expected. For the first time in a long while, Lucy acknowledged me in her world. And though I wasn't naive enough to believe a single evening could mend the cracks between us, I allowed myself the smallest hope that maybe, just maybe, this was a beginning. Then the music changed. The lights dimmed. The dance floor began to fill. I wasn't paying much attention until I noticed him. A man approaching us with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing the outcome before he even asks the question. He didn't spare me a glance. Instead, he walked straight up to Lucy, extended his hand, and said, "Shall we?" His voice was smooth, self-assured, as if he already knew she would say yes. I waited for Lucy to laugh it off, to wave him away, to tell him she was here with me. But instead, she smiled. She was about to accept. Instinct took over. My hand closed around her wrist, firm but controlled. My voice was low, measured. "You're not going anywhere." That was the moment Wilson, the man I would later come to know by name, finally acknowledged my existence. He turned his head slightly, eyes landing on me unreadable. For a moment, the three of us stood in a silent standoff, the tension humming between us. "If you want to dance with my wife," I said evenly, "do things the right way, or don't do them at all." That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Lucy turned to me, her expression twisting with frustration. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she snapped, yanking her arm free. "You're embarrassing me." I stared at her, stunned by the venom in her voice. Then, without hesitation, she turned back to Wilson, brushing past me as if I were nothing more than an obstacle in her path. She was about to leave with him, right in front of me. No shame, no hesitation. Something inside me snapped. "If you take one more step," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding, "I will be forced to end this marriage." Wilson finally turned to face me fully, his gaze sharp, assessing. Then, with deliberate slowness, he smirked. "You've always been a weakling," he murmured, "and you won't do anything." Then, without breaking eye contact, he took Lucy's hand and led her away. And she let him. The weight of humiliation settled over me, but I refused to let it show. I would not be the fool who caused a scene in a room full of her colleagues. I would not give them the satisfaction. So I turned and walked away. Alone, Lucy came home late that night. I heard the door open, the sharp click of her heels against the hardwood floor. I was still awake, though sleep had long abandoned me. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, ready for a fight. But I wasn't prepared for the words that came next. "You embarrass me." Her voice was sharp, filled with resentment. "You made a scene for no reason, and then you just left. You abandoned me at my own work party." I sat there in silence, absorbing every word. In her mind, she was a victim. I was the villain. It was in that moment that I saw the truth. Lucy no longer respected me. Not as her husband, not as a man. And a marriage without respect is nothing more than a house built on sand. I could have argued. I could have fought. But I already knew no amount of words would change the truth. And before I could fully deal with us, there was another matter that needed my attention. Wilson. I wasn't a man who sought out conflict, but I was not a man who let blatant disrespect go unchallenged. And Wilson had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated me. The morning after the party, the air in our house was thick with silence. Lucy moved around as if I were invisible. No greeting, no acknowledgement, just the cold, deliberate sounds of drawers slamming and heavy sighs. It was her way of punishing me for the night before, for daring to stand my ground. But I had already checked out. Whatever game she was playing, I was no longer a participant. My mind was elsewhere. By midday, I took action. I hired a private investigator with simple but precise instructions. I wanted everything on Wilson. His secrets, his habits, his past. Every misstep he had taken, every corner of his life laid bare. Where he lived, who he met, where he spent his nights. If there was anything to be found, I would have it in my hands. The investigator didn't ask questions. He simply nodded and got to work. Days passed, and Lucy continued her silent treatment. I barely noticed. My focus was on the results, which arrived weeks later. More than I had expected, more than I had hoped. Wilson was married. 2 children. A wife who, judging by the photos, still lived under the illusion that she had a faithful husband. But that wasn't all. His past was riddled with complaints from women in his workplace, accusations of inappropriate advances. Some settled quietly, others dismissed under corporate indifference. A pattern of behavior hidden beneath bureaucracy and silence. Then came the real revelation, the evidence of his affairs. Photos, videos, timestamps that left no room for doubt. He had been careless, meeting women in hotels, lounges, even dimly lit parking lots. And among them, Lucy. Seeing proof of her betrayal should have devastated me. It should have broken me. But it didn't. Somewhere deep inside, I had already known. This was just confirmation. And now, armed with the truth, I was ready to act. Wilson's downfall had to be thorough. The first strike was personal. His wife deserved to know who she was married to. I compiled a package, a USB drive filled with images and videos, irrefutable evidence of his infidelity. Alongside it, a simple note, "You deserve better." A delivery man placed it directly on her doorstep. I gave it time, letting the fire spread within their home, letting her process the truth. Whether she confronted him, packed her bags, or threw them out, I would never know. It wasn't my concern. That was their battle. But Wilson's losses wouldn't stop there. His career was next. I started sending emails to his company's HR department. Anonymous reports detailing his workplace misconduct, his pattern of using his position to pressure women into silence. One report wouldn't be enough. No company moves on a single complaint. So I made it look bigger. Multiple email accounts. Each one a different voice, each one armed with variations of the evidence. I painted a picture of a toxic workplace, of employees tired of suffering in silence. The whispers turned into meetings. The meetings turned into an official investigation. Wilson was being watched, questioned, scrutinized. It took a month before the final decision came. He was fired. Lucy did not emerge unscathed. The company suspended her along with the others involved in the office scandal. Maybe they were still deciding whether to keep her, or maybe they were giving her time to reconsider her choices. Either way, her spotless reputation was no longer intact. The day Wilson lost his job, Lucy walked through the door looking drained, her usual sharp confidence dulled by exhaustion. She didn't say a word about it, but I already knew. My inside contact had kept me well informed. The emails, the investigation, the final verdict. I watched her from across the room, my voice calm. "Rough day?" She scoffed, rubbing her temples. "You have no idea." I leaned forward, holding her gaze. "I might. Wilson's gone, isn't he? And you're suspended." Her shoulders tensed. For a split second, I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes before she forced a laugh. "Oh, God, here we go again." She shook her head and started toward the kitchen, pretending not to hear me. I didn't let her escape. "How long were you sleeping with him, Lucy?" That stopped her. She turned back, rolling her eyes with a nervous chuckle. "Are you seriously still on this? My God, Theo, you're obsessed. You've been insecure and bitter ever since that party." I didn't react. I just stared. She crossed her arms, sighing dramatically. "All I did was dance with a man, and you turned it into this whole fantasy in your head." Her voice took on a pitying edge. "You overreacted that night, and now look at you, acting like some detective in a bad crime show." I said nothing. Instead, I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a folder. I dropped it onto the table in front of her. Photos. Lucy's face drained of color. For the first time, she had no words. Then came the switch. The shaking voice, the glistening eyes, the sudden desperation. "Theo, why would you do this?" She stepped closer, reaching for me, her tone dripping with anguish. "You ruined everything. My job, my life. Was it your goal? To destroy me?" I let her rant, let her blame me for exposing what she had hoped would stay buried. When she finally fell silent, I spoke evenly. "The divorce papers will be ready soon. If you have a problem with that, take it to court." Then I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, drowning in the wreckage of her own choices. Now, looking back, I have taken a few lessons from this experience. Some may agree with me, others may not, but these are the truths I have come to accept. First, disrespect is the first step to betrayal. The moment Lucy followed Wilson onto that dance floor, our marriage was already over. It wasn't about the dance. It was about what that moment represented. A wife who truly respects her husband would shut another man down without hesitation, especially in front of him. The fact that she didn't tell me everything I needed to know. Second, people show you who they are. Believe them. Lucy had been distant long before that night. The late nights, the excuses, the endless workload that somehow always took priority over us. Those weren't coincidences. They were warnings. Warnings I ignored because I wanted to believe we could still work. But the truth is, when someone repeatedly shows you that you are not a priority, it's because you never were. Third, revenge is best served cold. That night, Wilson called me a weakling, and for a moment, I believed him. I felt humiliated, powerless. But emotions make people sloppy, and I refused to be reckless. Instead, I waited. I gathered information. I ensured that every move I made would carry weight. In the end, that single moment of humiliation was transformed into complete destruction. Wilson lost his job. His marriage, no doubt, was in ruins. And Lucy, she got exactly what she deserved. Finally, setting things right is never a waste of time. Some might say I spend too much energy on this, that I should have just walked away. Maybe they're right. But when you're openly disrespected, when someone makes it clear they have no regard for you, reclaiming your power isn't just an option. It's a necessity. I refuse to be the man who let himself be walked over, and I regret nothing. So tell me, was I right to act as I did, or should I have handled it differently